We're at the CEC office in Warsaw with CEC's chairman, Marek Matraszek, to discuss something of a political bombshell on Polish political scene. Marek, last week Prime Minister Beata Szydło has resigned from the post of Prime Minister, and Mateusz Morawiecki, the Minister of Development and Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, was appointed as Poland's Prime Minister. First of all, why did Beata Szydło resign, I think, is the basic question.
Well, of course, the resignation of Beata Szydło wasn't her decision. It was ultimately a decision of the party leader, Jarosław Kaczynski, who, although recognizing the contribution that Szydło had made over the last 2 years to the success of Law and Justice, and she was and is regarded as a very popular Prime Minister, particularly given her focus on social policy, which was a big flagship part of the first 2 years of the Law and Justice government. There was a sense that the next 2 years, leading up to the crucial parliamentary elections at the end of 2019, needed a new form of leadership. And that ultimately was the reason. And Beata Szydło, being a very strong party loyalist, basically agreed to the change. And as you know, she hasn't disappeared. She has been rewarded in a way by a very important post in the new government of Deputy Prime Minister responsible for social policy. So she will very much remain part of the scene. But Morawiecki represents a new opening for Law and Justice, and that was the intention of Jarosław Kaczynski when he took that decision.
And with that new opening comes quite a peculiar history of Morawiecki himself within the ruling Peace Party, because he's quite a newcomer that wasn't previously embedded into party structures. So how did such a young politician come to be the Prime Minister?
Well, it is true. Law and Justice is a very structured organisation, and it's very unusual for someone like Morawiecki to have come in at such a high level of government when 10 years ago he wasn't really part of the Law and Justice party then. He comes from Wrocław. His history is obviously in the banking sector, but his political background is very strongly of the peace view of the world. He's very anti-communist. His father, as you well know, is a very respected veteran member of the Polish anti-communist opposition from the 1980s, Kornel Morawiecki, who is actually an MP as well. He got into parliament on the Cookies party list. So there's no doubt about Morawiecki's political credibility in the eyes of Jarosław Kaczynski. But Morawiecki brings something that Kaczynski really thinks is very important right now. And that's a new opening in relation to Brussels, but it's also an attempt to expand the Law and Justice electoral base even further towards the centre, and particularly in the face of what I'm sure Kaczynski recognises is the very high possibility that Donald Tusk will probably return from Brussels in 2019 to try to coalesce the opposition against the government. And for that reason, Morawiecki, because of his banking background, his professional background, he will be a much tougher opponent for Tusk than had Mrs. Szydło still remained as Prime Minister.
And with Tusk in mind, do we really have to wait for his return for the opposition to throw any punches at Prime Minister Morawiecki? Or is any sort of restructuring on the opposition possible right now?
It's going to be the nomination of Morawiecki makes it even more difficult for the opposition to attack the government, because actually Morawiecki, particularly in his speech to Parliament yesterday for the vote of confidence, really ticked a lot of boxes that many people, even some critics of the government, had been looking for. There was a much softer approach on Brussels. There was a much bigger focus on the middle classes. There was a much bigger focus on enterprise, modernization, digitalization of the economy. These are all modernizing themes, which ultimately have until now been the territory of some factions of the Civic Platform Party. So it's going to be more difficult to attack Morawiecki, because ultimately he represents, I think, a much more of a middle ground approach. Although there's a very strong ideological substance in him, his approach is much more centrist, and I think that's going to make life for the opposition more difficult.
And of course, this is not the end of this political earthquake, because everybody was expecting that some sort of reshuffle would happen, but that got pushed in time until January. What can we expect? Will it be a major change? Will Morawiecki appoint a lot of new faces.
It is true, though, as you say, the current change is literally just of the Prime Minister, and he's essentially swapped out with Mrs. Szydło. Everyone expects, and in fact Mr. Kaczynski himself yesterday in an interview stated that at the beginning of January there would be a major reshuffle or change out of ministers, and already people are starting to speculate on who might be changed by Mr. Morawiecki, the Minister of Health, perhaps the Minister of Environment, perhaps the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is all speculation. But undoubtedly that change will come, and because of the way the Constitution works, it's actually very easy now for Mr. Morawiecki to come to terms with President Duda, and to the two of them ultimately, although with reference to the Law and Justice Party, will be able to make quite substantial changes to the cabinet. But I think that is what people are waiting for. And I think it's only when that happens we'll be able to really comment on where this new government is going.
Well, thank you very much, Marek, for that overview. I'll see you back in January when the new Council of Ministers.
And a happy Christmas in the meantime.
Thank you very much. For more information about Poland and the region, please follow us at CECGR and visit our website for the latest briefs.